The Arizona sun had a way of scorching the earth without apology, and on that dusty Friday afternoon it was no different. The sky shimmered with heat as waves rolled off the cracked pavement outside a fading roadside repair shop just outside the small town of Sierra Vista. Inside the garage, the air smelled of oil, rubber, and heat. Tools clanked, fans buzzed, and the hum of classic rock played from a radio that had survived 2 decades of grease and dust. Jake Myers wiped his brow with the back of his hand as he leaned over the open hood of a '94 pickup truck. A mechanic since his teens, he had built the business with his bare hands and barely held it together since his wife passed away 3 years earlier. Raising their daughter alone hadn't been easy, especially with bills mounting and clients growing fewer by the week. But Jake wasn't one to complain. He worked, he hoped, and above all, he loved his daughter, Lily. Lily was not your ordinary 8-year-old. Instead of cartoons, she liked engine diagrams. While other kids played tag, she was more likely to be found watching YouTube videos about torque and timing belts. Jake never pushed her into it. It just came naturally. She was curious, observant, and smart beyond her years. Sometimes she'd sneak out to the garage and quietly watch her father work for hours, asking questions that most apprentices wouldn't dare. That afternoon, as Jake wrestled with a stubborn radiator hose, Lily was sitting cross-legged on an old toolbox, sketching something on a piece of cardboard. She paused only to sip warm lemonade from a plastic cup before looking up at the sound of tires crunching gravel. A beat-up military-style Jeep pulled into the lot, its exhaust coughing with every motion. It sounded angry, like it had traveled too far without care. Out stepped a tall man, broad-shouldered, sunburned, and carrying the kind of presence you don't ignore. He wore jeans, boots, and a grey t-shirt stretched across a chest full of old battles. His hair was close-cropped, his jaw strong, and a faded Navy SEAL's tattoo peeked from under his sleeve. Jake put down his wrench and walked over. "Afternoon, what can I help you with?" The man extended a hand. "Name's Mark. She's been acting up, won't go past 30 without stalling. Thought I'd roll the dice and stop here." Jake shook his hand. "Well, you rolled right. Let me take a look." Mark nodded and stepped aside. But before Jake could even open the hood, Lily had already hopped off the toolbox and wandered over. She didn't say anything at first, just crouched near the front wheel, inspecting the suspension like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Jake noticed and called out, "Lily, give the man some space." But Mark laughed. "She's fine. Seems like she knows what she's doing." Lily looked up. "Your intake valve's loose, and the spark plugs are probably fouled. That's why it sputters when you accelerate." Mark raised an eyebrow. "That so?" Jake, half embarrassed and half impressed, gave a chuckle. "She's not wrong, actually." Mark leaned down beside her. "Show me." With confidence that didn't belong in someone so small, Lily pointed to the part she meant, explained what was likely happening, and even suggested a quick fix that could hold until better parts arrived. Jake stood off to the side, watching them both, a mix of pride and awe swelling in his chest. Mark looked at Jake. "You teach her all this? I guess she just absorbs it." Mark nodded slowly. "She's sharp. I've met Marines with less mechanical sense." Jake laughed. "She doesn't even know what a Marine is yet." Lily stood up and looked at Mark. "Are you a soldier?" "Used to be," he said softly. "Now I just try to keep my wheels turning." "Well," she said with a shrug, "then let's fix them." Mark and Jake worked side by side, but it was Lily who guided them through the most important steps. By the time they were done, the Jeep roared to life, smooth, steady, almost thankful. Mark looked amazed. Jake leaned on the hood, shaking his head. She was right about every part of it. Mark stared at Lily for a long moment. Then he said, "You're something special, kid. I hope the world sees that one day." Lily smiled, shrugged, and walked back toward her drawing. Jake handed Mark a rag. "No charge today, she earned it." Mark took the rag but said nothing. Instead, he walked back to his Jeep, started it up, and sat for a moment with his hand on the steering wheel, looking back at the girl and her father. Then he drove off. Jake assumed that was the end of it. He had no idea that Mark wasn't just another stranger. He was about to become the reason everything changed. The next morning started like any other. Jake was elbow deep in a busted alternator, and Lily was in her usual corner of the garage, sketching what looked like a custom-built off-road buggy. The radio played low, and the smell of motor oil hung in the air. Business had been slow for weeks, and Jake was already calculating whether this month's rent would come before or after groceries. Then just before noon, a sleek black SUV pulled into the lot, kicking up dust in a swirl of dry wind. Jake looked up and squinted. This wasn't the type of vehicle that usually visited his little garage. The doors opened, and out stepped two men in clean-cut suits and dark sunglasses. Behind them came Mark, the same ex-SEAL from the day before, now wearing a formal navy blue polo with an insignia on the chest and a folder tucked under his arm. Jake wiped his hands on a rag and approached, eyebrows raised. "Everything okay?" Mark smiled and held up the folder. "Better than okay. Mind if we talk?" Confused but curious, Jake led them inside to the small office space near the back of the shop. The suits remained quiet, while Mark placed the folder on the desk and opened it. "I wasn't just in passing through yesterday," Mark began. "I was in town on assignment. I work with a veterans outreach program that also handles private security and fleet management for some government branches. We've been looking for a local mechanic who could handle a regular maintenance contract for our vehicles in the region." Jake blinked. "Wait, what are you saying?" Mark slid a paper across the desk. "I'm saying you're hired, if you want it. We need someone with honesty, skill, and grit, and someone who doesn't mind the occasional tank engine or armored vehicle. You'd get paid above industry average, with full support from the program." Jake stared down at the contract, unsure if he was reading it right. This wasn't just a gig, it was enough work to keep his garage running steady year-round. It was everything he'd been praying for. "But why me?" he asked. Mark chuckled. "Because your daughter didn't just fix my Jeep, she reminded me what potential looks like. You raised her right, Jake. She's confident, smart, and kind, and it's clear where she got it from." Jake swallowed hard, eyes misting as he looked out the window toward Lily, who was now helping an old man air his tires near the pump. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Mark replied, "because that girl deserves a future, and this shop, it deserves to thrive." Jake shook Mark's hand, still stunned, and said the only word he could manage, "Yes." The following weeks were a whirlwind. New tools arrived, business signs were updated, and even a fresh coat of paint was applied to the garage's weathered walls. But the biggest change came when a new sign was installed above the entrance: Myers and Daughter Auto Repair. Jake hadn't planned on including Lily's name. He thought she was still too young, but Mark insisted. "She's the reason this all started," he said. "Let people know it." Lily's eyes sparkled when she saw the sign. She hugged her father so tight he almost couldn't breathe. From then on, the garage wasn't just a workplace, it was a place of pride. Military vehicles rolled in weekly, local families started dropping by again, and soon even a couple of auto magazines came knocking, curious about the shop with the 8-year-old assistant who diagnoses engines better than grown men. One day, a local reporter stopped by for a feature story. She interviewed Lily, who sat on her mini-stool in grease-stained jeans and talked excitedly about how combustion worked and why torque mattered. Her photo ended up on the front page of the Sunday paper with the headline, "Tiny Mechanic, Huge Talent." Business exploded. But through it all, Jake remained humble. He still worked late. He still fixed cars for neighbors who couldn't afford it. And he always made sure Lily got her homework done before touching a wrench. As for Mark, he visited often, not just as a client, but as a mentor. He brought Lily books, invited her to engineering events, and once even gifted her a miniature engine model used in military vehicles. Lily kept it on her desk at home, next to a photo of her mom. Years later, when Lily became the youngest mechanical engineer to join a Navy innovation team, she credited it all to "the man with the broken Jeep and my dad who let me dream with my hands." And Jake, he still ran the garage, proud as ever, under the sign that never changed. Because one small moment of kindness, One honest interaction, one child's voice that was truly heard. It was enough to change everything.